Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. Normally it's not a subject we'd cover, but there's a bit of a downstream impact based on some changes they made to their Active Directory and net login implementation. Virtualization Classic is testing really well. We've had some good feedback on AI coding, both, asking how we're using it and saying how users are using it. And we got a couple more different viewer questions. So let's jump into the first little bit here that kind of caused a bit of a stir for us. Normally, Microsoft patching doesn't affect us much, Chris, other than those of us who are still using it on our work machines. So what happened here with regards to Active Directory and net login here?
Well, they threw us for a little bit of a loop this week, Chris, because again, normally Patch Tuesday comes and goes, and we just kind of record it as an afterthought, like, oh, that was interesting. Okay, yeah, people, please go update your desktops and your workstations. We don't run a lot of Windows Server here internally. But this one caught us. This one caught us, right? So let me go ahead and read some of the details. So our Alexandra Bain from our release engineering team has been posting in the forums. We're getting kind of this great little weekly update of what's going on in TrueNAS world, any hot new issues to look at, feedback, tickets, all that good stuff. And of course, she went and posted this one this week, which was excellent. But let me read it just in its entirety because I think it states the situation very well. So as of July 8th, which was a couple days ago now, Microsoft will release an important security update for Active Directory domain controllers for Windows Server versions prior to 2025, which is a lot. Anyway, this update includes a change to the Microsoft RPC Net Logon protocol, which improves security by tightening access checks for a set of RPC requests. Now, Samba running as domain members in these environments will be impacted by the change. That's the part where we had to perk up and take notice. If a specific configuration is used, and you can see below for which configurations are affected. So Windows Server version 2025 is already equipped with these specific security hardenings, and Microsoft's now planning to deploy them to all supported Windows Server versions all the way down to 2008. Wow, that's going a ways back.
And here we were saying old people are worried about losing Windows 10 support, and here they are patching Server 08. Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing. But anyway, yeah, Microsoft, what are you going to do? So who's affected? Okay, so Samba installations of TrueNAS, if you're using TrueNAS as a member server to a Windows Active Directory domain, will be affected if they are configured to use the AD ID mapping backend. Samba servers not using this configuration will not be affected by the change, at least our current knowledge and understanding of the change as it sits right now. There's no action required. But for people who are using the ID map backend, there is an impact here. So current versions of Samba with the affected configuration will no longer function correctly once the Microsoft update has been applied to your Windows server. Users will not be able to connect to the SMB service provided by Samba for any domain configured to use the AD ID mapping backend. So
is this
short version of this?
Yeah, is that the Unix ID mapping? Is that like the RFC 2307 stuff?
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember the specifics of which RFC that is, but yeah, more or less it's going to be how it maps, I believe, to the UIDs on the TrueNAS side. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm not a Samba internals expert. But all that to say, it means as soon as you update your Windows server, if your TrueNAS breaks and your users can no longer log in, that's an issue. You're going to need to get a new update to TrueNAS. Bottom line is now we have to come out with our own series of patches to address this and basically chase the upstream behavior here for integration. So annoying to say the least, but we're going to be addressing it shortly. We have a whole slew of updates planned. So updates to Electric Eel 24.10, which is what most of our enterprise customers are still on, 13.0, and then Fangtooth 25.04 will all be going out in the coming days and weeks to address this. So I think the first set of those will be landing possibly this week, maybe early next. And then by the end of the month, all three will be patched and there will be fixes out in the wild. So pay attention. Again, most home lab users listening to this, you probably don't run Windows Server with Active Directory. I mean, I know a handful of you do, but I question you for other reasons. Like, why do you hate your life that much? But okay, whatever. You might have your reasons. Look, I have 5 kids and I'm not even tempted to set up Active Directory. Like, I don't need it that bad. Come on. I can do a couple of local users and move on.
Well, I mean, open LDAP and things like that exist too, or free IPA or something. Don't pay the Microsoft tax.
Well, don't pay it, but also, again, it's if you only got, again, a dozen local users, maybe you don't need it. But anyway, okay, whatever. But if you're not a home lab and you are a small, medium business and you are definitely running Windows Active Directory, yes, please pay attention. keep an eye out for incoming TrueNAS patches. You will want to get some time scheduled to get those updates applied pretty quick here.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's good news to know. And, hopefully nobody out in the audience is too impacted by this. If you are, again, like Kris says, keep an eye on our release notes. Check for those updates periodically. If you happen to be one of those folks who are on 2504 and you haven't fixed that false update bug, hopefully we can get that fixed. It is a known issue, and I will put the link in the video description on how to correct that. But we will actually have an update for you fairly shortly.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks out, the .2 is dropping in just a couple weeks, which has that fix included in it. So that'll be a good one.
Exactly. All right. So, hey, we have a question here from Andre. And he says, I heard in the last episode that we're going to be using libvirt for both VMs and LXCs in 2510. So that's our virtual machines and our containers. He says, is Incus integration still planned, or is this the end of Incus in TrueNAS? I had high hopes for Incus. Thanks.
Oh,
so
I thought we made it clear last couple of weeks, but maybe not, or maybe I didn't state it correctly, Andre, but you did hear correctly. That is basically where we're removing the Incus backend as the tool, which is the thing that runs LXC and VMs on TrueNAS. So
it's the thing that runs it now.
It's the thing that runs it right now in Fangtooth. The classic virtualization we talked about has been always using libvirt. That's not changed. So just to be clear, though, we're not expecting really to lose any functionality as part of this. We're even working now on LXC support directly using libvirt, which we've talked about a little bit previously. So you still get all those same lightweight Linux instances supported fully on TrueNAS, aka jails for the core crowd who's still coming from FreeBSD land. It just won't be routing it through that Incus Go-based backend, but the functionality is going to be doing the same thing. Same as with VMs, moving back to libvirt doesn't mean, they're doing a new virtualization system. It's still KVM at the end of the day. At the end of the day, they're all KVM under the hood, right? It's just what wrapper are you using that provides kind of the management layer functionality around it. So, but this is a good opportunity, Kris, to just kind of maybe state this a little bit more clearly and on the record so people understand the what and why. In the future going forward with TrueNAS, we do plan to de-emphasize kind of talking about the particular tool chain elements we use to deliver the TrueNAS experience. Now, granted, it's still open source. The tools are always going to be there. They're visible. You can always go look. You can poke around. You can see what's under the hood if you want. But we as a strategy are going to be moving a lot more gradually towards the focus being on the features we expose in the UI and what we officially support. Why is that important, Kris? I think you know the answer to this.
The real answer for this one is because it's been said a few times when people ask, why can't I do something like this in TrueNAS, is that it's been designed as an appliance for a long time now and less of a general purpose operating system. So everybody always said, scale is Linux, scale is Debian based. So that means I can do all these things that I could on a regular Debian system. I'm going to install apt and pull my own various packages. It's not the philosophy that it was originally designed for. And as you said, Kris, we're actually going to try to, kick it into a higher gear in the future. We're trying to get more. We're trying to have more of the functionality be exposed in a sustainable and understandable way in the interface. It's less about needing to go do these like the custom hacks at the command line. We still have some scenarios where people need to drop down to it for things. And the result of that can be sort of long-term instability or even just sort of shift between versions where you said, you did it with the CLI in an old version and now you're going to do it with the UI. And it can be confusing. And especially when you go to the CLI, I know there was, I was helping somebody out, I think it was on Discord, with CLI commands. I wrote them out very explicitly with a capital W in a parameter, and they put a lowercase w in. It says, well, that says something different. Thankfully, what you were trying to do failed because it's not supported in your hardware, but you really don't want to change cases. And it can be that kind of thing that we're trying to put the guardrails around by using the UI to say, hey, let's sanity check that command you're trying to run through our middleware and make sure you're not about to do something that could be potentially harmful to your availability or integrity.
Well, and the changes that go through the middleware get recorded, stored in the configuration database, so you can act as an appliance and blow away your boot volume, import your config, and move on, and not have to remember, did I change that comp file, or did I forget to make that tweak in etc and all the usual stuff you do on your Linux box. By the way, you said Debian. I've not heard it pronounced that way. It's Debian. Chris. Debian.
Debian.
It's named for Deb
Long
and Ian.
Ah,
Yeah, it's two people.
That's me.
Oh, okay.
Shall I call it Linux and really upset some people?
Oh God. Oh, okay. Sorry. We're just having some fun now. But at the end of the day, that command line, you guys got to think about it. Like, we're not trying to take the command line away or anything. It is there. That is your kind of like break glass. I need to get down and go troubleshoot something. But that shouldn't be your go-to for, I'm going to go set something up. I'm going to go run some shell things and do typical Linuxy, Unixy things. That's a great way to get yourself in trouble. So, it's relevant. And the reason I wanted to talk about this question today is we don't have a lot of intentions for folks to go be driving around primarily via the command line. Long-term users know it's a real great way to shoot your foot off if you kind of delve too deep into the dangerous mines of Moria, which a little Lord of the Rings reference for my nerd homies.
Yeah, if you dive too deep and get too greedy with ZFS, you can unearth some pretty awful things.
Some demons lurk down there. But even using ZFS in its raw form is super powerful, even to the most experienced of administrators. But they also know you can land yourselves in really hot water if you do the wrong things at the wrong time or in the wrong way. We've even talked internally about, why don't we do more things with just running ZDB? It's like, yeah, but there's a minefield there. Like, you can really quickly blow your leg off. So it's like, you got to be careful, right?
Yeah, there's been some ZDB commands that, a lot of users will have in the forums. It's usually just you're doing read-only queries of the labels. And typically at the point where you're doing that, you probably have a pool that's not mounting, and we're trying to figure out why. Running things like ZDB commands against active pools, it can, basically it's coming in at the debugger level. It's kind of interrupting the regular flow of IO going to that pool. So if you do a ZDB command that basically is telling it, hey, I want to query, every block in your pool, well, you might have just put yourself really behind the 8 ball as far as the rest of your IO going to that pool. And you may be waiting a very, very long time for that command to return, and you might not be able to easily interrupt it. So,
yeah. Car analogies work really good here, Chris. I found, for whatever reason, there's always a car analogy that works with these kind of things. So again, it's like sitting in your car and you have all the controls and knobs and you're controlling it and you're using it to drive the car and basically get from point A to point B and do whatever you want to do. That's how the manufacturer intended it. Now, it doesn't mean you can't go buy the diagnostic computer and hook it up and change tunings. And like my son does this, to change certain things on his engine parameters. You absolutely can do that, but understand that's not how the manufacturer intended for you to drive the car, right? It's there as a diagnostic tool so you can go troubleshoot problems, or if you're an Uber geek, go do your tunings. But then you also understand, like, you're kind of acting like a mechanic now, and you take responsibility for when you cause damage to your engine.
The first thing that the manufacturer is going to do is say, well, can you revert all those changes, and does your car run normally again when you take off the, whatever you put in there? All the tuner guys from back in the day who, they'd slap that cold air intake onto their, their econo box, route it all the way down to the fender. If you drive through a puddle with one of those, you're going to have some consequences if you suck a bunch of water into your engine. It's kind of the same thing here, where it's like, hey, you can modify it, but you got to be a little bit careful. You got to know what you're doing. And, sometimes it'll be a case of, if something acts funny, especially if you've turned on the dev mode, we have that install dev tools command. It basically is going to say, all right, if you know what you're doing, we can make that system read write again. We can even enable things like apt for you. But the first thing that we're going to ask for in a bug report is, does this happen on a clean system that hasn't been put in dev mode? Yeah. It's the first thing we need to know.
It's not a good use of engineers' time to go and unwind history of what did you do to the system that's non-standard, because now I got to understand all these things that we don't even bother testing for or accounting for because it's just not part of our normal product.
And the biggest challenge I have when I'm trying to sort down something is usually reproducing it. As I say, if I can reliably reproduce something, boy, I've got a great way to test it, tune it, see exactly where it's breaking in the code. But if I can't reproduce it, or if I can only reproduce it 1 out of every 20 times, it's going to be really tough, because it means I got to have all that logging, and it might just whiff 18, 19 times in a row, might whiff 40 times in a row. That's how odds work. If I'm looking for something, it's going to be Schrodinger's bug, and trying to observe it is going to change the outcome.
Absolutely. And we've seen that actually. Turning on debugging makes the problem go away because it's a race condition. Those are the worst. Hate those.
Yeah.
So all that to say, with great power to tinker and repair comes the great responsibility to investigate your issues that result from it. So just keep that in mind. The whole I avoid warranty shirt I was wearing a week or two ago, like that. Remember what you're
void
doing
them
here.
proudly. Void them proudly.
Yeah, void them proudly. Just
be
own the
aware
outcome.
be aware. Oh yeah, own the outcome. If you break it, you get to keep all the pieces.
And if you end up that guy who has your car out on blocks in your front lawn, okay, that's on you. That's what you gotta be cool with that.
You may build something awesome eventually, but in the meantime, it might not be the most convenient. You might have to take the bus. Yeah.
Yep.
All this to
circle back. Yeah, let's get back to LXC here.
We're
obviously working hard. You may see some code already landing in our GitHub repositories now. The goal is to make those existing LXC instances auto-magically just migrate to the new backend again, so you don't see it or know or have to care. Assuming you have not been at the command line flipping knobs that we didn't set ourselves to begin with. So if you're already well off the beaten path, that's going to be hard. We can only account for so many variables in how we test internally all the different migration scenarios. So the further you've gone and kind of tweaked and tuned under the hood, so to speak, the less likely that your upgrade scenario is going to be well tested and supported in future upgrades. So keep that in mind.
Yeah. So quick, I guess let's just do a little recap here for those who missed a couple different episodes. So 2504.2 in a couple weeks, 2 of them by the end of the month is the plan, is going to re-enable that virtualization classic for those coming to 2504 from 24.10. So your VMs won't migrate at all to the new system. They will go and stay in their regular virtualization header. 2510 in the fall, everything's going to be consolidated into the instances tab from a user interface, but we'll be using the same backend technology for virtualization classic for VMs, consolidated back into sort of that one-stop shop visually. So you'll still be able to launch your traditional VMs. You'll still be able to launch your lightweight LXC containers. We're still going to preserve that whole catalog of distros, I believe, Chris. That's the plan right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the plan. So you still have that convenience of I'd like a Debian this or, a Fedora that, whatever.
Yeah. Debian. I'll have to get used to saying that.
Well, Deb and Ian. And then when they split up, what do we call it now?
Oh, there's a joke in there somewhere.
All right. Okay.
Oh, dear. All right. Well, hey, let's look at some feedback a bit from the last episode. We had some good conversations going around AI, maybe, not about the jokes. They didn't like those, so I'll watch those in the future. Oh. Well, so we got one user, he says, so he got some feedback regarding home-based AI and local hosting. He says, the way I look at it is that the number of model parameters are expanding just so darn fast. As a home user, I'm never going to be able to run something that's keeping up with the big cloud servers. He doesn't have the NVIDIA H200s or something that has, hundreds of gigabytes of VRAM. He says, I'm never going to be happy running local AI. If I was ever to experiment, I'd run them on a separate server away from my essential TrueNAS backup. Maybe I'd consider running it within my TrueNAS server if it was specific to general storage and local development, but never parameters that would give him everything. So I'm guessing like it's a case of agentic AI. You certainly wouldn't want to give an AI just carte blanche to run ZFS commands, kind of for the reasons we alluded to earlier in the episode. Probably a bad decision.
Necessarily do that. And I think he's talking also about the size of the model specifically, because that is true. So you can go download, some pretty good models that you can run locally. I run 5.4 here locally on my TrueNAS, by the way, as part of my Home Assistant setup. That's actually the AI I have hooked into Home Assistant, and so I can have a conversation. I have some of those little, I guess, preview voice devices they have for doing like your Google Home type stuff with Home Assistant. It works pretty well, and then I can have a conversation with that AI. But that 5.4 model, no, it's no ChatGPT, it's no Claude, it's no Gemini. It doesn't have as many parameters, so it's not going to be as smart. Like I can only go so much into a conversation. It doesn't have all the details. Now, that said, over time, of course, GPUs will get bigger and with more generous space for RAM. And so maybe you go from that 8 gig model to a 24 gig. And at some point, you're going to hit a place where it's like for my home setup, that's actually not bad. Like that's actually pretty decent. You're going
to hit like the 320 kilobit MP3 of AI, where you say it's not perfect, but it's good enough for my day-to-day use.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going to head pretty quickly. And then you'll have the big boy, the cloud providers who, they have a model that's, a terabyte in size, and it has to be spanned across multiple GPUs, of course, to run. And that's all cool. And then you'll use that for the heavier research projects, probably the development type of projects as well. And of course, if you're serious, there's nothing saying you can't go and build a crazy home lab system and have a bunch of GPUs and then run a massive model. Again, those exist. You can download some pretty huge DeepSeek models today and run something that's on par with a lot of the big cloud provider guys.
Yeah. Usually this thing that says I can't do that is my bank balance that says, no, you can't afford to have, an 8-way, H200 system or something in your basement, Chris.
Well, it's like seeing somebody with a petabyte of storage in their house. It doesn't happen that often, but hey, we know you're out there. We've seen it. You guys have showed us. It does happen. Some people are like, that's their thing. And yeah, they have a petabyte locally in their basement. Cool.
Yeah, this is your invitation. This is your invitation to flex your home AI. If you do have one of those absolute monster builds, by all means, let us know. Send it in the comments. Send it in. Maybe we'll see if we can feature some slideshows in an upcoming one, or even shout you out on the forums or elsewhere. It's pretty good. So we got another user who's asking. He says, "I'd love to hear more about AI agentic coding." He says, "Any chance you can sort of list and compare the options that you've tested here? Any findings between the free options and the paid options?" I know you're a big fan of cloud code right now, Chris.
Yeah. So one thing I will say quickly on free versus paid is, again, you kind of get what you pay for, and the paid options are always going to be better. Now, Google did something really ingenious just recently, which it hasn't quite, I don't think people have caught on to it yet, or it hasn't really matured, but their whole Gemini code that just came out, they have a free plan that you can go and do coding with. But then they put in the notes that, by the way, anything you do coding with, they're training on. So this is now going to be the model going forward is, yeah, we'll give it to you for free, but then we're using it to train and reinforce our model based on what you're most likely coding and developing with it. And so that'll be interesting to see if that pays off long term, if that makes Gemini smarter and smarter and smarter over time, or how that works. But that's going to be the model, I think.
That's been their model for a lot of the other things, whether it's been, photos or video. That's kind of how Google VO exists now, doesn't it? It was trained on all the user submitted content.
Absolutely. So that'll be interesting to see that play out. Maybe in the future, a lot more open source is developed using free tools because you don't mind it being trained on open source software, and then closed, of course, you go pay. But yeah, Claude code. So let me talk about kind of the different models. So that Claude code is really our cream of the crop tool we're using right now. That plus their Opus 4 model is really quite nice and very powerful. But we've tested a handful of others, and by no means have we tested everything. There's so many new ones and different things out there. We're constantly saying, oh, we should go try this and that next. But we've tested things like Gemini code, which recently launched, Aider, which is an interesting one, GitHub's Copilot as well. So a couple thoughts on some of these different services, Chris. Gemini. So it's pretty rough right now. I think it needs another 6 to 12 months to bake. Personally, it has this super annoying tendency to get hung up into loops that I haven't seen Claude do since it was back in research preview, which, way back when, 4 months ago or something like that. Yeah. It wasn't that long ago.
That's strange, because didn't Google just say they'd really bumped their context window up? You'd think that would help it avoid that. So it's probably a logical issue they're having.
It's a logical issue, I think, with the tool itself, where it gets stuck in a loop where it's like, I need to go fix this, and then it runs into an error fixing the file for whatever reason. And then it goes to run the command it was testing with again, says, oh, that's broken. I need to go fix this. Then it runs into an error and doesn't realize I've not actually made any changes to the file, and I'm just retesting the exact same bug over and over. So we had a couple just get stuck in a loop, and they just keep spinning forever. And it's like, whoa, slow down. What's going on here? So that's freaking annoying. But it's, again, brand new tool. Google just released it again. Claude, I saw that a little bit in the early days when I was testing it back when it was in research preview, but they sorted that pretty quick. So maybe Gemini code will. And again, when you're watching this video, please take a look at the timestamp. If it's already like October, it may be entirely different by now. So please, take this all with a grain of salt. These things are changing so fast. Now, next up on the list is Aider. So Aider is still pretty clunky, is my opinion. We've run through it, but although it's one of my favorite kind of dark horse candidates, I think it's a cool idea. It's more of an open version of Claude code. In other words, it's not tied to any particular backend. It's Python based, which makes me feel happier than, say, running Claude code, which is Node based, just for religious reasons about running Node. That feels icky, at a command line. But we're hoping it does take off and become one of the better ways to run a variety of models where you can switch between the different agentic brains for your particular coding session. But the tool itself just has a lot of rough edges and needs some refinement. It's going to take some time, I think, to mature. So we have that, and then GitHub Copilot, which is not bad. We actually do use that still in some capacity, and it's more been used internally with IDEs. Some of our team uses IDEs as kind of a helper and less of a vibe coding, like I'm writing code, and more of a, hey, I see you're writing this function. Let me help suggest some changes or add the comments for you or do little inline things. Yes,
Clippy
yes.
returns.
It's more, we've described it internally as like Claude code is like you're in an Uber in the back seat and the Uber's taking you where you want to go. And then GitHub's more like, no, I'm in the driver's seat and I have somebody sitting in the passenger seat with the map telling me you might want to take a right here, you might want to take a left here, kind of. That's again, there's a car analogy for everything. So that's kind of the way to think about the two models of development. They each have their pros and cons, but right now we're really digging kind of the Claude code thing. So I wanted to riff on that a little bit to share some of our experiences, though, which is, first of all, it's a whole new set of challenges. You got a whole new set of tools, and how do you use them for maximum effectiveness? There's a high frustration factor here where you just things you used to do naturally don't work in this model. For example, managing your context windows. Okay, so each session you go and spin up with Claude Code or Gemini or whatever, they have a limited amount of token context that the AI can basically keep in its memory that it's working from in this session, right? Think of it as RAM, which it more or less is, okay? When you fill that bucket up, the AI is going to compact, which is basically just taking a history of everything you just did in the previous context window and summarizing it. And as we all know, compacting means loss of information in this case. So, okay, well, then there's tricks you have to bring to the play here. How do you adapt to that? How do you manage your context window? Well, start tasks always with a fresh context. Don't get to, 10% context left and then go start a new thing. You got to go and be strategic. Or even how you do the compaction. Just internally this week, I was sharing with some folks, they didn't realize you could give instructions to Claude Code during the compaction. So for example, if I'm having a session that's going to run over the context window and we're debugging an issue in this piece of code I'm working on, well, great. When I hit the compaction window, I can tell it compact, but by the way, keep the full log file I just shared with you 3 messages back that we're still using to debug from. Don't compress that. So you can kind of give it some instructions on what's relevant and what's not through the compaction process. So hopefully it carries enough useful information forward to stay really effective in the next context window, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I imagine it's a lot like, reading the email summary versus reading the email is what's going on here, where you're going,
Yep.
just if there's something that's really important, it should be called out almost verbatim by it. And that's probably what you're doing to the agent by saying,
that is what you're doing.
This file's really important. Please don't try to summarize this.
Just like with the summaries, it's hit or miss. Sometimes it's great, and other times it's like, ooh, you missed a really vital detail, which you didn't think was vital at the time, but I need that because I'm using that for whatever we're working on. But also, one other thing I'll throw out there is there's this issue of expectations. Okay. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions around how AI and this kind of coding is supposed to work. I look at each fresh new context session as like starting over with a brand new engineer. Anybody who's worked in the industry knows when you join an organization as a developer, there's that spin up time factor. You could be the hottest hotshot Python developer on the face of the earth. I don't care. You still have to adapt and learn the code base you're dropping into, all the unwritten rules around this is how we architect things here, our code styles, our testing practices. The list goes on and on. Most engineers bump around for months and require a lot of guidance from their more experienced peers before they kind of settle into the groove and they get all the tribal knowledge and they're effective. That's the ramp up period, right? We talk about that. That's just a known thing. So you have to think about AI in a human way. AI, on the other hand, it's like sitting a fresh developer down every time you open up a new context window. Think about that, what that means. So
having to ramp them up every single time.
So it becomes vitally important that you provide it detailed enough, keyword there, prompt instructions so it can learn to quickly rescan, readapt to your code base, your styles, your preferences. Oh, by the way, here's the CI testing tools. blah, blah, blah. If you can nail those set of instructions and those persist between context refreshes, you're able to take that ramp period from I've just reset all my memory, I'm now a fresh engineer, to I'm reading this information, and now I'm back up to ramp status within moments without a lot of painful course corrections that you're having to give it on the fly, just like you would with a human engineer who's just sitting in the seat for the first time and doesn't know your organization. And then, of course, this all get lost again on the next context window, and the cycle repeats. So again, but the difference is, though, I can't bring a human in here and say, here's an engineering handbook with everything written down. It's 200 pages. Please read this, and I need you to go deliver on that project by the end of lunch. Or so, like, it doesn't work that way. Humans can't absorb information that fast.
Yeah.
AIs can, though.
AI can do that.
Yeah. So this is where I can give it, here's your, we'll say your 5 pages of instructions for this TrueNAS piece of middleware code base. And oh, by the way, everything's detailed in here. And as part of reloading your context window, you're reading this document and you're quickly getting back up to speed. Like, oh yes, here's the format. Here's the layout. Here's where things are structured in this project. Here's where the test stuff is. Here's our preferences as far as like how we'd like you to write code, what style things to follow, blah, 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 blah. And now you can start working, right? So again, just a little bit of different mindset on how you think about it and how you interact with it. It just means your engineering handbook for those particular projects need to be excellent. It's more important than ever that you spend quality time here, because the more time you put into getting that piece right, then the other side of that, which is just seconds for the AI, is now it can go produce something useful that you don't have to like complain and fix and like, oh, it's writing junior engineer code, which again, every junior engineer does. The first pull request you ever created a new company is pretty rough. And you get a lot of feedback from your team, like, okay, you need to change this, do it this way, blah, blah, blah. So unless you want your AI stuck in that junior mode forever, you better give it good instructions up front.
Yeah.
There's my spiel for the day.
The old adage was garbage in, garbage out. It applies to, still applies to AI, because AI is a computer. So give it something good in there. Like you said, whether it's talking about the free versus paid, is how much time now have you spent on it versus how much money have you spent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So anyway, I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the future. And again, if you're watching this too far down the road, you might have to catch up on more recent episodes, because I'm sure it's changed. I actually expect a lot of these tools to leapfrog one another in the coming months, because everyone's in that rapid like arms race right now to see who can have the hottest tools and the best models. And there's a lot of money being poured in the industry into this.
Absolutely. It's changing hands. It's a very, very, tight race. And we see people sort of come up, like you said, leapfrogging from the back. Suddenly somebody will get a huge burst and they'll overtake their competitors. And the next one down the line will say, well, okay, it's my turn to run to the front of pack. And, again, check the times. What did we say on the previous episode? We'd have an AI coded OS by Christmas, probably. See if we're right. Still could happen, I think.
We'll see.
Simple one.
All right. So we want to get in some slogging around now, huh?
Yeah, let's flip the script a little bit. Let's get back to the technical ZFS side here with a question here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we got a question from Jonathan emailed into the T3 email. He says, so basically he said, what's up with the slog sizing? So the slog is the separate log device for ZFS. Basically you're saying, want to put a solid state or some other really fast device there to catch your synchronous writes only, in order to, preserve the safety of those while making them fast and responsive. So he says the TrueNAS docs mention 8 to 32 gigs as a general good practice option, but we know it's hard to get regular SSDs in those sizes. TrueNAS Core used to have over-provisioning, so basically using a much smaller chunk of that drive as an option right in the webUI, but it's not in scale. So he says, what can we do as this to help, maybe discourage people from taking two terabyte drives, adding them as their slogs and asking, hey, why don't I get 2 terabytes of data acceleration? So there's a pretty good resource on the forums, which I will link in the video description, talking about, the ZFS write throttle and some generalizations and basic advice on it for sort of how it works, what the default values are, and how you can, with caution, tune those. But to address the question about over provisioning, generally the way we would do it would be through something like the SATA host protected area. SAS has options to set the logical LBA limitations on a drive, NVMe can create namespaces. It was possible through the UI on core, but it often resulted in a lot of user frustration, especially on community builds, because the SATA and SAS commands can only be set once per physical power cycle of the drive. And that was, even beyond a reboot, you would actually have to physically pull power to the drive. For enterprise environments where you have, a hot swappable bay where you can physically unrack the drive, or you had a SAS controller where you could send that, hey, device reset with the power disable pins that cause so many of our community users grief when they're, shucking a USB attached drive and have 3.3 volt power constantly being supplied that says, lock this drive in a state of eternal reset. That's actually the purpose for this pin, is to be able to say, I want to send a temporary power cut to this drive, so you can reset those once per power cycle commands. It's usually useful for things like you're updating firmware on a drive itself, or you're sending these, hey, resize your logical capabilities. NVMe, I mean, in general, that's a pretty tough nut to crack for hot swap as usual, because now you're destroying and recreating PCI Express devices. I really don't see a lot of success with that in the community space. It is possible, but boy, it's difficult. When you're going and pulling drives in a non-hot swap machine, you could still have a bad time even if you didn't bump something internally. If your controller doesn't support it properly, or you just accidentally, you hit the wrong cable or you pull the wrong cable. The option is still available through the CLI. And again, there's a link in the thread in the video description. It is a destructive operation for that drive. It's the equivalent of like the please destroy my data parameter on there, because you're basically telling it, hey, you're going to go from a 200 gig or a 1.6 terabyte down to 32 gigs in size. Everything beyond that point, it's gone. But the challenge is with that, so that's with the hardware over provisioning, telling the drive itself to do it. It's the best way to guarantee the wear leveling behavior, which is basically saying you're going to write to the first 8 or 16 or 32 gigs of the drive, because the slog is only ever written to during normal operation. It's only read from in a case of emergency recovery. So basically all this drive is doing is writing to that space and then invalidating the blocks, and they end up getting trimmed. If you do it in the hardware, your drive knows, well, I wrote my first 8 gigs, I'm going to drop them. The next 8 gigs of physical NAND on the drive are clear. I can write to there. It's basically just sliding that window along to where it'll write. It is the best way to guarantee it. But most really modern drives, after even about like the mid-teens of the 21st century, they act pretty identically. Whether you do the host provisioned area, whether you set up a smaller partition to work with, or even if you fully allocate the drive but leave it largely empty, they've gotten much, much better with their firmware. I know in the early days of the drive, you kind of had to do that hardware on
we had no choice.
Provisioning. Yeah, you had to do it. And if you're looking for a way to guarantee that it's done, it is the way to do it. And you can explore the options through the CLI. You can use third-party live environments with something like HDParm, and again, those destructive commands. But I would suggest if you are going to do that on something where you say, hey, I have data on this system, just for safety's sake, unplug your other drives, make 100% sure that you are targeting the correct one. You don't want to accidentally take one of your, 8 terabyte spinning disks or something and tell it, hey, you're now magically 16 gigs in size, and then wonder what happened to the rest of your pool, because it's going to say, I can't add this drive back in. It's only 16 gigs.
Yeah.
So
that'll be a bad day. Again, command line, be careful if you're going to go that route.
Exactly. The command line's there. Case usually matters when you're doing command line parameters. But all that to say that, the slog devices, the ZILs, it's usually a case of you're going to end up with a large drive because you need the performance and the endurance, not so much the capacity. So, look into the thread, explore it, and you'll read some of the philosophy about, where you would use one of these log devices and sort of how the right throttle works. It's been a bit of good technical information for those of you.
Good. Oh, thanks, Chris. That was awesome.
That was. I enjoy those kind of technical conversations. So again, please continue to submit those in. I think with that, we're going to wrap up the show for this week. So next week, there is going to be a pause in our scheduling. We're having a bit of a summer vacation time. It's, it's hot outside. It's nice weather. We're going to go outside, try and touch some grass, but we'll be back the following week with another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. As always, please continue submitting your questions, technical or otherwise, to t3@truenas.com. See us in the comment section in YouTube below the video. Don't forget to do those usual things. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Keep listening to T3 to stay on top of TrueNAS and tech topics. And we'll see you next time.